Please do not let them find my child." The words were barely a whisper when Emily Carter opened her front door that cold winter night. Outside, beneath the pale glow of the moon, a woman stood at the edge of the porch, exhausted and trembling, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. Snow covered her cloak, and her breathing was uneven, but her eyes still carried the strength of someone who had survived more than anyone should have to endure. Emily froze for a moment, unsure of what she was seeing. She lived alone in a small cottage near the silverpine forest, far away from the politics of the kingdom and the conflicts of powerful families. Her days were simple. She gathered herbs, helped injured villagers, and quietly used her healing abilities whenever someone needed kindness. She had never expected a stranger to arrive at her door in the middle of the night. "Who are you?" Emily asked softly. The woman looked at her, hesitation filling her tired expression. "My name is Claire Bennett," she answered. "I need somewhere safe just for tonight." Something in Claire's voice made Emily step aside without another question. She did not know why she trusted a stranger. She only knew that turning someone away when they needed help was something she could never do. As Claire entered the warm cottage, Emily noticed details that did not match an ordinary traveler. The way she carried herself, the quiet alertness in her eyes, the old symbol embroidered inside her cloak. It was the mark of a werewolf, a legendary group of protectors known throughout the kingdom. Emily had heard stories about them since childhood. They were warriors who guarded the borders, loyal to the crown, and respected by all who knew their name. But the woman standing before her looked nothing like the fearless legends from those stories. She looked like someone who had lost everything except her determination to keep going. Emily prepared a warm drink and carefully helped Claire rest near the fireplace. "You do not have to explain anything tonight," Emily said gently. "You are safe here." Claire looked at her in surprise. For a long moment she said nothing. Perhaps she was not used to kindness without questions. Perhaps she had forgotten what it felt like to be helped without expecting something in return. "Why are you helping me?" Claire finally asked. Emily smiled softly. "Because you needed help." The simple answer seemed to affect Claire more than any grand promise could have. But as the night grew quieter, Emily noticed something else. The symbol on Claire's cloak was not just the mark of a werewolf. It was an older symbol, one connected to the royal family of Silverpine Kingdom. A secret hidden beneath layers of dust and forgotten history. Emily did not yet understand what it meant. She did not know that the woman she had welcomed into her home was connected to the most powerful figure in the kingdom. She only knew that someone had arrived at her door asking for compassion. And by opening that door, Emily had unknowingly changed the fate of an entire kingdom. The woman who once carried the strength of a warrior now sat quietly beside a small fireplace, watching the flames move gently through the darkness. Emily Carter could not stop thinking about the stranger who had arrived at her door. Claire Bennett was unlike anyone she had ever met. Even while exhausted, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that revealed a lifetime of discipline and courage. The next morning, sunlight entered the cottage through the wooden windows, bringing a sense of peace that neither woman had expected. Emily prepared a simple meal and placed it beside Claire. "You should rest," Emily said softly. "Your body has been through a lot." Claire looked at her with surprise. "You still do not know who I am, and you are still helping me." Emily smiled. "Does knowing your name change whether you deserve kindness?" The question left Claire silent. For years, she had lived in a world where people cared about titles, duties, and loyalty before they cared about the person standing in front of them. But Emily was different. She did not see a legendary werewolf. She only saw someone who needed a safe place to recover. As the hours passed, small pieces of Claire's story began to appear. She had once served the kingdom as a trusted protector, someone who dedicated her life to guarding others. But after a series of misunderstandings and painful choices, she disappeared from the public eye. She left behind the reputation of a warrior and became someone the world believed had vanished forever. "Why did you come here?" Emily asked carefully. Claire looked toward the forest outside the window. "Because I needed somewhere no one would think to search." Her voice carried sadness, but also determination. Emily noticed the way Claire touched the old symbol hidden inside her cloak. It was not an ordinary mark. It carried history. "That symbol," Emily said gently, What does it mean? Claire hesitated. She had spent months protecting the secret. But something about Emily made her feel safe enough to answer. It belongs to a promise made long ago between my family and the royal bloodline. Emily's eyes widened slightly. The royal family? Claire nodded slowly. There are things about my past that the kingdom does not know. Before Emily could ask more, a distant sound moved through the forest. Not a threat but a sign that someone was searching. Claire immediately became alert, the instincts of the warrior returning beneath the exhaustion. Emily saw the change in her expression. The woman who had arrived unable to stand was still the same person who had once protected countless lives. You are not weak, Emily whispered. Claire looked at her. I feel weak. Emily shook her head. Being tired does not erase who you are. Those words stayed with Claire. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe she was more than the circumstances that brought her there. But far beyond the forest, inside the walls of Silverpine Castle, a message had reached the throne room. The missing werewolf had been found, and the Alpha King who had spent months searching for her was finally about to learn where she had gone. The message from Silverpine Castle traveled faster than anyone expected. By sunrise, the quiet forest surrounding Emily Carter's cottage was no longer just a peaceful place hidden away from the world. Somewhere beyond the trees, the kingdom was searching for answers. Inside the small cottage, Claire Bennett remained, unaware of how much her disappearance had changed everything. She sat near the window, watching the morning mist slowly disappear between the branches. For the first time in months, she was not running. She was not hiding. She was simply resting. Emily noticed the difference in her expression. The woman who had arrived frightened and exhausted was beginning to remember who she truly was. You seem different today, Emily said while organizing herbs on the wooden table. Claire gave a small smile. Maybe because I finally feel like I can breathe. Emily looked at her carefully. You were carrying more than just a secret, weren't you? Claire lowered her eyes. She knew the truth could no longer remain hidden forever. My name is not the only thing connected to the royal family, she said quietly. My family has protected the kingdom for generations. But there are things about my past that people were never meant to know. She reached inside her cloak and revealed the ancient symbol Emily had noticed before. It was a mark passed down through her family, connected to an old promise between the werewolves and the royal bloodline of Silverpine. Emily studied it with curiosity. Why would someone want this hidden? Claire looked toward the forest. Because some people fear what they cannot control. Her answer was simple, but Emily could feel the weight behind it. Claire was not someone searching for power. She was someone trying to protect what mattered most. Meanwhile, inside the grand halls of Silverpine Castle, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood stood before the ancient records of the kingdom. He was a man known for his strength, his leadership, and his ability to remain calm during uncertainty. But today, even the Alpha King carried a rare emotion in his eyes. Hope. For months, he had searched for the missing werewolf who had once stood beside the kingdom. Many believed Claire Bennett had disappeared forever. Ethan never accepted that. She would not leave without a reason, he said quietly. There must be a truth we have not discovered. When the final report arrived, the room became silent. A small cottage near Silverpine Forest. A healer named Emily Carter. A mysterious woman carrying an ancient royal mark. Ethan already knew. Claire had been found. But he also understood something else. Whoever had helped her had done what many powerful people had failed to do. They had offered kindness without asking for anything in return. Back at the cottage, Emily and Claire shared a quiet moment by the fireplace. Claire looked at the small home that had given her safety when she had nowhere else to go. I do not know how I can repay you, Claire said. Emily shook her head gently. You do not have to repay kindness. Outside, the sound of approaching footsteps moved through the forest. Claire looked toward the door, knowing the time she had been waiting for had arrived. The Alpha King was coming. And soon, the world would learn the truth about the woman who had disappeared and the person who chose to save her. The forest became unusually quiet as the first signs of the Alpha King's arrival moved closer to Emily Carter's cottage. The birds disappeared into the trees, and the gentle morning breeze carried the sound of footsteps approaching through the silver mist. Inside the small home, Claire Bennett stood near the window, knowing the moment she had tried to avoid was finally here. Emily watched her carefully. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Claire looked down for a moment before answering. "I do not know if anyone is ever ready to face the past." Emily understood those words. Claire was not afraid of the Alpha King. She was afraid of what would happen when the truth was finally revealed. The door opened slowly, and the quiet cottage suddenly felt much smaller. Standing outside was Ethan Blackwood, the Alpha King of Silverpine Kingdom. He was not surrounded by celebration or arrogance. He stood there with a calm expression, carrying the weight of someone who had spent months searching for someone important to him. His dark royal cloak moved gently with the wind, and his eyes immediately found Claire. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Years of loyalty, memories, and unspoken emotions existed in that silence. Then Ethan looked past Claire and noticed Emily standing nearby. He understood immediately. This was the person who had given Claire a safe place when the entire kingdom was searching for her. "You helped her," Ethan said. Emily nodded. She needed help. Simple words. But to the Alpha King they carried great meaning. Many people had offered assistance because of position, reward, or recognition. Emily had done it because kindness was the right thing to do. Claire stepped forward slowly. "I did not want anyone to worry." Ethan looked at her with relief rather than anger. "You disappeared because you thought you had no other choice." Claire remained silent. She had expected questions. She had expected disappointment. Instead she saw understanding. "You protected what mattered most," Ethan said quietly. "That is what you have always done." Emily noticed the change in Claire's expression. The warrior who had arrived at her door carrying exhaustion and uncertainty was beginning to feel seen again. But the moment of reunion did not last forever. Ethan's advisors arrived with the ancient records they had discovered in the castle archives. They carried information that could change how the kingdom viewed Claire's disappearance. The truth was not a simple story of a missing warrior. It was a story of sacrifice, loyalty, and a promise that had been misunderstood. As the records opened inside the cottage, the old symbol on Claire's cloak began to match the markings written on the pages. Emily looked between Claire and Ethan, realizing their connection went deeper than she had imagined. The woman she saved was not only a legendary werewolf. She was someone whose choices had protected the future of the kingdom. And the Alpha King had not come to take her away. He had come to bring her home. The truth hidden inside the ancient records changed the atmosphere inside Emily Carter's small cottage. The quiet home that had once been a simple shelter now held the secrets of the entire Silverpine Kingdom. Claire Bennett stood beside the wooden table, watching as the old pages revealed pieces of a history that had been forgotten for years. Ethan Blackwood remained silent as he read every word, his expression showing the weight of the discovery. The records explained that the werewolf bloodline had never disappeared. It had been protected in secret because of an ancient promise between the royal family and the guardians who served the kingdom. Claire was not someone who abandoned her duty. She was someone who carried a responsibility that few people knew existed. "They believed I left because I no longer wanted to serve," Claire said quietly. But the truth was different. Ethan looked at her. "You were protecting something greater than yourself." Claire lowered her eyes. She had spent so long carrying the burden alone that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone understand her choices. Emily listened carefully, realizing that the woman who came to her door was never simply running away. She had been carrying a difficult decision because she believed it was the only way to protect the future. But the discovery also brought new challenges. When news reached Silverpine Castle that Claire had been found, different voices within the kingdom began questioning the situation. Some nobles wondered why a missing werewolf had returned after so long. Others questioned why a simple Omega healer had been the person to find her. Emily never expected attention. She had only opened her door because someone needed help. Yet now, her kindness had placed her at the center of a story much larger than herself. "I did not do anything special," Emily said when Ethan thanked her. The Alpha King looked at her with respect. "You gave someone safety when others only searched for answers." Those words stayed with her. She had always believed small acts of kindness disappeared unnoticed. She was beginning to understand that sometimes the smallest choices created the biggest changes. Later that day, Ethan prepared to return to the castle with Claire and Emily. Before leaving, Claire stood outside the cottage and looked back at the place where she had found peace. "I thought I had lost everything," she said softly. Emily smiled. "Maybe you only needed a place where someone could remind you who you were." Claire looked at her with gratitude. For the first time in a long time, she felt more than a survivor. She felt like herself again. As the group traveled toward Silverpine Castle, the kingdom prepared for the return of the missing werewolf. But they did not yet know the full truth. They did not know that the woman they thought had vanished had protected them all along. They did not know that the healer who opened her door would become part of a story remembered for generations. And they did not know that the arrival of the Alpha King would reveal a new chapter for everyone involved. The journey back to Silverpine Castle was quieter than anyone expected. Claire Bennett watched the endless forest pass by through the carriage window, feeling a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty. For so long, she had believed returning to the kingdom would only bring questions and judgment. She had prepared herself to face disappointment, but she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand beside her. Across from her, Emily Carter sat peacefully, holding a small collection of herbs she had gathered before leaving the cottage. Even after everything that happened, Emily remained the same person who had opened her door on a cold winter night without hesitation. Claire looked at her with gratitude. "I still do not understand why you trusted me," Claire said. Emily smiled gently. "Because you were someone who needed help. Sometimes that is enough." Those simple words reminded Claire of something she had almost forgotten. Before she became a symbol of duty and responsibility, she had simply been someone who wanted to protect others. When they finally arrived at Silverpine Castle, the entire kingdom gathered to witness the return of the missing werewolf. The grand halls that once carried uncertainty now filled with curiosity. Many had heard different stories about Claire's disappearance, but few knew the truth. Ethan Blackwood walked beside her as they entered the castle, his presence showing the kingdom that Claire was not a forgotten warrior returning from the past. She was someone who still held an important place in their future. Inside the royal chamber, the council waited. Some members welcomed Claire with respect. Others remained cautious, still holding on to old assumptions. Ethan noticed every expression in the room. He knew that bringing Claire home was only the beginning. "For too long, people judged what they did not understand," Ethan said calmly. "Today we remember the truth." The ancient records were placed before the council once again. They revealed that Claire's actions had protected a secret connected to the future of the kingdom. She had carried a responsibility that required patience, courage, and sacrifice. But Ethan also made sure everyone understood another truth. The person who deserves recognition is not only the warrior who protected this kingdom, he said. It is also the healer who gave her shelter when she had nowhere else to go. Everyone turned toward Emily. She immediately looked uncomfortable with the attention. She had never wanted praise. She had never expected her simple choice to matter to anyone beyond the small cottage in the forest. But Ethan understood something important. Kingdoms were not changed only by great battles or powerful leaders. They were changed by ordinary people who chose compassion when no one was watching. Later that evening, Emily stood on a balcony overlooking Silverpine Kingdom. The lights of the villages below created a peaceful view beneath the night sky. Claire joined her, no longer looking like someone searching for a place to belong. "You gave me a home when I had lost mine," Claire said. Emily smiled softly. "Maybe we both needed to find something we thought we lost." Behind them, the castle bells rang throughout the kingdom. A new chapter was beginning. The return of the werewolf had revealed forgotten truths, but the greatest discovery was still waiting. Because the bond between kindness, loyalty, and destiny had only started to awaken. The days following Claire Bennett's return to Silverpine Castle brought changes that no one expected. The halls that once carried rumors and uncertainty now carried conversations about understanding, loyalty, and the people who had been forgotten. Claire remained humble despite the attention surrounding her. She did not see herself as a symbol or a legend. She simply saw herself as someone who had made difficult choices and hoped those choices had protected the people she cared about. Emily Carter noticed this more than anyone. Even inside the grand castle, surrounded by wealth and tradition, Claire still carried the same quiet strength she had shown inside the small cottage. "You know they see you differently now," Emily said as they walked through the castle gardens. Claire looked across the peaceful fields beyond the walls. Maybe. But I do not want them to remember me because of a title or a story. I want them to remember that people can choose to do what is right. Emily smiled. She understood why Claire had earned the respect of so many. Her strength was never about being admired. It was about protecting others even when no one understood her choices. Meanwhile, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood continued studying the ancient records connected to the Werewolf bloodline. He discovered that Claire's return was not only connected to the past, it was connected to the future of the kingdom. The records spoke of a guardian who would appear during a time of change, someone who could unite people who had been separated by misunderstanding. But Ethan also discovered something unexpected. The prophecy did not speak only about a warrior. It spoke about the people who stood beside that warrior. The healer who opened her door. The king who refused to stop searching. The individuals who chose compassion over fear. When Ethan shared this discovery with Claire and Emily, both women were surprised. I thought the story was about me, Claire admitted. Ethan shook his head. No. It was always about the choices people make when no one is watching. Those words stayed with them. The kingdom had spent years believing that only powerful figures could create change. But the truth was much simpler. A single act of kindness had brought together a lost warrior, a compassionate healer, and a king who refused to abandon hope. However, not everyone inside the kingdom accepted this new understanding immediately. Some members of the council struggled to accept that someone outside their expectations had become such an important part of the future. They questioned Claire's return and wondered whether old traditions should remain unchanged. Ethan listened carefully to every concern, but he also remembered what had brought them to this moment. A woman in need had arrived at a small cottage door. Someone chose to help her without knowing her identity. That decision changed everything. As evening settled over Silverpine Castle, Claire stood beside Emily and watched the first stars appear above the kingdom. I never thought a simple act of kindness could travel this far, Claire said. Emily looked toward the lights below. Maybe kindness always travels farther than we realize. And somewhere inside the ancient castle walls, the forgotten promise between the werewolves and the royal family began to take a new shape. The kingdom was not only welcoming back a lost warrior, it was learning a lesson that would remain long after their names became part of history. The morning light poured over Silverpine Castle, revealing a kingdom that was slowly learning to see the world differently. The return of Claire Bennett had not only changed the way people viewed the missing werewolf, but it had also changed the way they understood strength itself. For years, many believed power belonged only to those with titles, armies, and influence. But now they were beginning to understand that courage could also appear in a quiet cottage, behind a simple wooden door. When someone chose to help a stranger, Claire walked through the castle gardens with Emily Carter beside her, feeling the weight of a new reality. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer running. Yet part of her still wondered if she truly belonged among the people who once believed her story was lost. You seem worried, Emily said gently. Claire looked toward the castle walls. I spent so long protecting others that I forgot how to let others protect me. Emily smiled softly. Maybe that is something you are allowed to learn. Those words stayed with Claire. She had spent years believing responsibility meant carrying every burden alone. But now she was discovering that trust could also be a form of strength. Inside the royal chamber, Ethan Blackwood reviewed the final pages of the ancient records. The documents revealed that the connection between the werewolves and the royal family was never built only on duty. It was built on trust. The kingdom had survived because ordinary choices made by loyal people had protected it through difficult times. Ethan understood that the future could not be created by a single ruler. It required people who believed in each other. Later that day, Ethan invited Claire and Emily to the royal hall. The gathering was not meant to celebrate power or rank. It was meant to recognize the truth that had been hidden for too long. A kingdom is not defined by the strength of its walls, Ethan said before the court. It is defined by the hearts of the people who protect it. His words reached everyone in the room. Claire looked around and saw faces that had once questioned her now showing respect. Emily stood quietly beside her, still surprised that her simple decision to open a door had become part of the kingdom's history. After the gathering ended, Claire and Ethan walked through the castle courtyard. The silence between them felt peaceful, not uncertain. I thought returning would mean proving myself again, Claire said. Ethan looked at her. You never had to prove what was already true. Claire smiled slightly. And what was that? Ethan answered. That you were never defined by what others believed about you. For the first time in years, Claire allowed herself to imagine a future beyond survival. She could be a protector without being alone. She could accept kindness without feeling weak. And she could finally understand that her journey had not been about escaping the past. It had been about finding where she truly belonged. As the sun began to set over Silverpine Kingdom, Emily watched the two of them from a distance and realized something beautiful. The person she had saved on a cold winter night had helped heal more than just an old secret. She had helped remind an entire kingdom that compassion could change the course of history. But the final chapter of their story had not yet arrived. A new promise was waiting, and soon the kingdom would witness the moment when the forgotten werewolf would finally return to the place she had always belonged. The first light of dawn touched Silverpine Kingdom, painting the castle walls with a warm golden glow. For the first time in many years, the kingdom felt whole again. The halls that once carried uncertainty now carried stories of hope, kindness, and the people who had changed the future through simple choices. At the center of those stories stood Claire Bennet, the werewolf who had once disappeared from everyone's sight. She stood in the royal courtyard, looking across the kingdom she had spent so long protecting from the shadows. She remembered the night she arrived at Emily Carter's door, exhausted and uncertain of what the future would bring. She remembered believing she had lost everything. But now she understood something important. Sometimes losing the path you knew was the only way to discover where you truly belonged. Emily stood beside her, watching the peaceful morning unfold. Do you ever think about that night? Emily asked. Claire smiled softly. Every day. She looked toward the small road leading beyond the castle. I thought I was searching for a place to hide. I never imagined I would find a place where I could finally be myself. Emily smiled because she understood. The greatest change in Claire was not that the kingdom respected her again. It was that Claire no longer needed anyone's approval to know her own worth. Inside Silverpine Castle, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood prepared a special gathering for the kingdom. It was not a celebration of victory or power. It was a moment to honor the people who reminded everyone what true strength meant. Before the entire court, Ethan spoke about the events that had changed their understanding of loyalty. We often look for heroes in the places where we expect to find them, he said. But sometimes the person who changes everything is the one who simply chooses to care. His eyes turned toward Emily. She immediately looked surprised. She had never considered herself important. She had only opened her door because someone needed help. But that small act had become the beginning of a new chapter for the entire kingdom. Then Ethan turned toward Claire. A true protector is not someone who never needs help, he said. A true protector is someone who continues to care, even when the world does not understand them. Claire felt the meaning behind those words. She had spent years believing strength meant standing alone. Now she knew strength could also mean accepting kindness, trusting others, and allowing people to stand beside her. As the gathering ended, Claire and Emily walked through the castle gardens one final time. The flowers moved gently in the morning breeze, and the kingdom beyond the walls felt brighter than before. You changed my life, Claire told Emily. Emily shook her head with a gentle smile. You changed mine too. Nearby, Ethan watched the two women who had helped restore something the kingdom had almost forgotten. One was a healer who opened a door. The other was a warrior who needed someone to believe in her again. Together, they proved that destiny was not always written through power or titles. Sometimes it began with a simple choice to help someone in need. And from that one choice, an entire kingdom found hope again.